Hey everyone, welcome back to another video here on DarkSec. I am Dark, and today we're going to be taking a look at the room, the hacker methodology on TryHackMe. Now, this is a pretty easy room, however, I still did want to cover it in a video to elaborate on the information that is provided. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into Task 1, Methodology Outline. What process does a hacker follow? Well, you might think that a hacker does whatever he or she wants. It is actually true that the professional hackers / penetration testers generally follow an established process to understand and exploit their targets. This ensures that there is consistency between how assessments are performed throughout the industry and is the methodology that drives assessments. The process that pen testers follow is summarized in the following steps. This is the general process that you're going to see with a standard penetration test. Different bits of this might be cut out depending on what the scope of the testing is. For example, this first step, reconnaissance, is a lot of times missing, especially if you're an internal pen tester. You won't necessarily do reconnaissance. And then sometimes enumeration can be a little bit limited from a recon standpoint. You'll be doing a lot of enumeration on boxes rather than finding more assets and things. That being said, so it goes from reconnaissance into enumeration / scanning. That's going to be your end mapping. Reconnaissance is going to be typically finding what assets a company owns. So for example, domains they might have, anything that's exposed on the internet that shouldn't be. You can look for emails that you can gather for doing phishing and other things like that. And then it moves into gaining access, so actually getting a foothold based on the information that you have garnered. This is a stage that is easier if you've done more work in this bit. You want to do more enumeration to make gaining access easier. Next, we have privilege escalation. Sometimes you don't need this. Typically, this comes in a couple stages of priv-esc. This is going to be actually going up to a higher level user on whatever machine you've compromised, and then gaining a higher privileged user within the domain. Covering tracks, this is actually probably the step in here I disagree with the most, as typically, unless you are doing red teaming, you are going to not cover your tracks. You usually don't really care. Covering tracks is something that you a lot of times will leave intentionally because you want the defenders to be able to use that in their training and potentially be able to catch you. Now, this will vary depending on the engagement, but it's just something to be in mind, or keep in mind rather. And then we have the final stage, which is reporting, and then report delivery is part of that. So it's going to be writing everything up. If you don't write it down, it didn't happen. As far as a pen test, that's typically the operating procedures that most companies go by. And then delivery is actually talking to either the client or talking to business partners and communicating those findings. And that can be done at a couple different stages. That's going to be talking about the actual findings and then making sure that not only does the person that you're communicating these to understand them, but also making sure that they have an actual plan going forward. Because if you do this pen test and they don't have anything to move with going forward, then it's kind of pointless. So answer the question below to continue. What is the first phase of the hacker methodology? That is going to be Reconnaissance, if I can spell that correctly. Perfect. Let's move into Task 2, Reconnaissance Overview. The first phase of the ethical hacker methodology is reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is all about collecting information about your target. Generally speaking, reconnaissance usually involves no interaction with the targets or systems. That is passive reconnaissance. There's also active reconnaissance, which can be actually interacting with those. In this specific case, for the methodology that's being referenced in this room, that's part of the enumeration phase. So passive reconnaissance is a pretty simple concept. Think about what tools we can use on the internet to gather information about people. What websites and technology come into mind to gather information about a target organization, technology, or set of individuals? In this case, let's use the company SpaceX. Stop here and take 2 minutes to do research on SpaceX and then note down any websites you might use to conduct research. Where is the place you started your research about SpaceX? Most likely you started at one of the most useful tools in a hacker's possession, Google. And as anyone that's done any programming knows, Google is your best friend. Most of your job with being a hacker is going to be Googling what you found and figuring out what exactly it is. Google is an incredibly useful tool, and there's an entire room, Google Dorking, which I highly recommend checking out. I do have another video on that as well, to use it effectively to conduct research. You might have also used websites such as Wikipedia to understand the history of SpaceX, use the company's Twitter or YouTube to see their latest news, releases, or sizzle reels, or even LinkedIn profile to research open company positions and or the company's organizational structure. Now, one note I do want to point out, this YouTube bit is an interesting one. Not a lot of people do research on the YouTube side of things. A lot of times a company YouTube page can contain a bunch of internal training videos, and you may think, okay, that's kind of boring. However, you can see what their practices are, and that's useful for social engineering, or what they should be doing. It gives you an idea. A lot of times you can see badges and other things in that that you can use for cloning, and so on and so forth. The cool thing is, all these very simple tools are valid reconnaissance tools. You might think hackers use special tools to conduct research, and in some cases that is true, but overall they use simple tools like these to conduct research. Reconnaissance usually involves using publicly available tools like Google to conduct research about your target. Even though it may seem simple, reconnaissance is the single most important phase of a penetration test. If you don't know about it from the reconnaissance phase, you don't know about a target, there's no way that you can hone in on it. You need to, it looks like an inverted pyramid, the workflow of a pen tester. You do a lot in each preceding stage, and you don't do as much in the next stage. That can vary a little bit, but generally speaking, you're going to want a lot of information, and then you narrow that down. You find more and more things that are useful and whatnot. There are some specialized tools that we can utilize, but for this introduction, it is good to know the following tools. So Google, specifically Google Dorking, this is part of ExploitDB, that they have the Google hacking database. Then Wikipedia, peoplefinder.com, Whodot is, that gives you information about websites. This will give you general information about a person. Sublister is a tool that I like to use, and I actually have another room on this. That is a tool for finding subdomains, and it is very, very fun to use. Hunter.io, I believe that is another general reconnaissance tool. I haven't used this one too much. BuiltWith and Wapalizer are fantastic. These are very, very similar. I'll show you Wapalizer up here, though. This shows you what a website's made with. And you can see the guts of it, which is really interesting. You can see there are tons and tons of stuff that are under the hood of a modern website, and TryHackMe is no different than that. So let's go ahead and dive into the questions. Who is the CEO of SpaceX? Hopefully I don't misspell his name. If I do, that would be really embarrassing. Do some research into the tool Sublister. What does it list? That is going to be subdomains. What is it called when you use Google to look for specific vulnerabilities or to research a topic of interest? That's just Google Dorking. Let's go ahead and move into task 3, enumeration and scanning overview. The second phase of the hacker methodology is scanning and enumeration. This is where a hacker will start interacting with, scanning and enumerating the target to attempt to find vulnerabilities related to the target. This is actually, if this is something you want to see in action, this is a phase that I highly recommend watching a tutorial video if you're not comfortable with this, of a more advanced room, and try to break down the steps that you're seeing the person in the video, be it mine or even like IPSEC or anyone else, or John's videos. You can see the concrete steps that happen, and while it might not be the same workflow every time, you can start seeing what different tools that they're using for doing that reconnaissance, and seeing it at a more advanced box, or even something that's like a medium level box, you get a really good feel of what that should look like in practice. And that's something that even if you want to go back and follow it along afterwards, even if you don't necessarily understand everything that's going on, this is all exposure based and it helps you out in the long run. So this is where more specialized tools start to come into the arsenal. So tools like Nmap, Derb, which is short for Dirbuster, two different tools technically, but this is for finding subdirectories. Metasploit, which can do scanning with auxiliary modules. ExploitDB, which you're going to use for researching specific vulnerabilities and whatnot, and then Burp Suite, which can let you examine web requests and other cool things like that. I do have a room on this, and I highly recommend checking it out if you're subscribed to TryHackMe. And others are very helpful to help us find vulnerabilities in a target. So don't worry about them now. You'll get into the nitty-gritty later on. In the scanning and enumeration phase, the attacker is interacting with the target to determine its overall attack surface. The attack surface determines what the target might be vulnerable to in the exploitation phase. These vulnerabilities might be a range of things, anything from a website not being properly locked down, a website leaking information, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, or any number of other vulnerabilities. To simplify, the enumeration and scanning phase is where we try to enumerate what the target might be vulnerable to. We're trying to figure out what exactly is all open, what's running on the target, and then we're going to do research based on that. For example, one important tool in our arsenal is called Nmap. I recommend checking out the Nmap room after you finish this room, and this is a great follow-up to this room as well. Nmap is a tool which can scan a target and tell us a wide variety of things. So what ports are open, and if you don't know anything about ports, I recommend checking out this video, and then that video as well. I'm not quite sure what those are, but we'll take a look at them in a little bit maybe. I might take a look at them after this video. The operating system of the target, so you want to figure out what exactly you are scanning against. Typically, this is going to be one of these two, Windows or Linux. Linux is pretty common for doing CTFs and things like that. Very seldom you're going to find OS X. However, it does happen, including what version of the operating system. This is the important part because it can tell you what vulnerabilities it might have. What services are running and what version of the service. A lot of times I will take the output of an Nmap scan and I will just Google the version and I'll see if something comes up, or I'll check the version and I will plop it into ExploitDB and I will see if there's anything interesting there. Nmap can attempt to fingerprint and determine the exact version of FTP. So for example, if we're looking at an FTP server, and that might enable us to find a specific vulnerability in the target, as I previously mentioned. Although that may sound like a lot of information, enough to pwn anyone and anything, right? There are other tools that will also be used in the Reconnaissance arsenal. Here's a quick sampling of the other tools you can learn on TryHackMe. I've talked about this first one, Dirbuster. This has a user interface, so it has a GUI. Dirb is the command line version of it. They're really not too different. Enum for Linux is a tool that can do just general enumeration against, I think it's not even just Linux boxes anymore. I'm pretty sure it's just, you can use it to do like RID cycling and other things against Windows boxes. Metasploit and Burp Suite I've also talked about as well. Answer the questions below to keep reading. What does enumeration help find or help to determine about the target? I'm going to look at the hint for this one. 2 words. Okay, hold on. I will pause and I will figure this out and we'll be right back. Okay, I was being silly. The answer is actually highlighted up here with the 2 words attack surface for that question. And I don't want the Nmap logo copied or dragged there. So it's going to be attack surface. Do some reconnaissance about the tool Metasploit. Which company developed it? That is Rapid7. They have some awesome folks over there. What company developed the technology behind the tool Burp Suite? That is going to be Portswigger. There we go. Let's jump into task 4, exploitation. Now that we have talked about the other 3 phases of a pen test, it is time to talk about the one that is often portrayed as the coolest. In the news, they often talk about this hack or this vulnerability, but the truth is that usually the exploitation phase of a pen test is not as glamorous as it seems. The exploitation phase can only be as good as the recon and enumeration phases before it. As I mentioned before, you usually do a lot more before you get to this phase. And if you did not enumerate all the vulnerabilities, you may miss an opportunity, or if you did not look hard enough at the target, the exploit you have chosen may fail entirely. You might just not have enough information. You might guess that something's going to work, and it doesn't. One common tool used for exploitation is called Metasploit, which has many built-in scripts to try to keep life simple. So there you can see the Metasploit logo. Again, there's a room on that. Highly recommend checking that out. And then you can also use tools like Burp Suite and SQL Map to exploit web applications. There are also tools such as MSF Venom, which allows you to build custom payloads. Beef, which is a browser exploitation framework. That is a very, very powerful tool. I don't think we have a room on that. However, I know that there is a room specifically on Burp Suite, as I mentioned before, and many, many others. So TryHackMe has tons of rooms dedicated to learning the basics of these tools, and I recommend learning from all of them. For now, I think you will have a good grasp on what exploitation means. Just remember a professional penetration tester never jumps into the exploitation phase without doing adequate reconnaissance and enumeration. My rule of thumb here is you want to have a reasonable suspicion that an exploit will work. usually I like to confirm that the version number is correct before I try to swing with something and see if it's going to work, especially if you are testing, hopefully not against a production environment, but anyways, you don't want to knock something over that could have been avoided to be knocked over. Keep in mind, whenever we're running an exploit, we're doing something that was never designed to work, and we're doing something that, developers didn't intend. A lot of times that can just cause really, really bad things if they don't work. A good example of this is, if you are familiar with it, Bluekeep, which is a vulnerability in Windows 10. This has been patched for some time now, but Bluekeep, you had, I would say, even on the latest version of this exploit at the time of recording, you probably have a 50-50 shot of blue screening the system that you're running it against. So definitely something to be sure about. What is one of the primary exploitation tools that pen testers use? I'm going to guess this is Metasploit, and there we go. All right, let's jump into task 5, privilege escalation. Now, one quick note on this: there are a couple specific rooms on TryHackMe. I know Tiberius has a couple rooms, one specifically on Windows Privask and then another one on Linux Privask. I believe the Cyber Mentor, I think he has one on each as well. I definitely recommend checking those out. They're fantastic rooms. And they give you a really good coverage of privilege escalation, and they're useful for studying for exams such as the OSCP. After we have gained access to a victim machine via the exploitation phase, the next step is to escalate privileges to a higher user account. The following accounts are usually what we try to reach as a pen tester. So in the Windows world, the target account is usually administrator or system. So NT system authority or administrator, they're effectively mostly the same thing. There's some minor differences, but we don't really care about those. In the Linux world, the target account is usually root. That is the system administrator on Linux. As you can tell, discovering what operating system a device is running on is very important to determine how we will escalate our privileges later. Once we gain access to a lower level user, we will try to run another exploit or find a way to become root or administrator. Privilege escalation can take many forms. Some examples are cracking password hashes found on the target, finding a vulnerable service or version of a service which will allow you to escalate privileges through the service, password spraying of previously discovered credentials, so password reuse, seeing if people are lazy, they reuse passwords. It's something that we always want to check for. Checking for default credentials, you would be surprised how often this comes up. Definitely something you want to check for right away. I've gotten used to just whenever I see a login form for an admin password, trying simple things like that, you'd be surprised how many times it works. Finding secret keys or SSH keys stored on a device, which will allow pivoting into another machine. So even if you can't go to a higher privileges on the computer that you've initially compromised, you might be able to go horizontally to another machine on the network, and you might be able to escalate there. Running scripts or commands to enumerate the system, such as ifconfig to find network settings, or the command find, and then this specifically looks for SUID binaries. You don't need to worry about those too much right now. They allow you to escalate privileges. They run as the account that owns them, to see if the user has access to any commands they can run as root. Yeah. That's typically done with sudo, just another method for Privask. You don't need to worry about that right now. Just know that these things exist, and that's something you'll get into a little bit later within your hacking career. These are just some examples of how privilege escalation could work, and there are many more ways in which privilege escalation could take place. Just think of this section as the methodology as getting to a higher level user account or pivoting to another machine with the ultimate goal to own the machine. In Windows, what is usually the target account besides administrator? That is going to be system. What thing related to SSH could allow you to log into another machine even without knowing the username or password? That is going to be keys. There we go. And then let's hop into task 6, covering tracks. Most professional and ethical pen testers never have the need to cover their tracks, and I mentioned this quite a bit earlier. This just isn't something that we do. However, this is still a phase in the methodology. You should always have the explicit permission from the system owner regarding when the test is happening, how it is occurring, and the scope of the targets in any penetration test. Since the rules of an engagement for a penetration test should be agreed to before the test occurs, The penetration test should stop immediately when they have achieved the privilege escalation and report the finding to the client. That depends. This heavily depends, this bit. Depends on what your end goal is. There is a big argument within the field of penetration testing that NT system authority or domain admin shouldn't be your final goal. You should be trying to find many more issues than that. You want to try to find information that might be leaked within the network, things that you would be able to see with a lower privileged account, but maybe you couldn't see with the first account that you got. Things like that. This depends. A lot of times I've had experiences where if you find something that either shows that it's been previously exploited, that's when you call the client and you say, hey, we need to talk about this because it looks like you need an incident response here. And you probably have a threat actor in your network. Or if you find something that is that is something that is sitting out to the open internet, that's usually when you want to stop what you're doing. And sometimes you don't even go through and exploit it. Sometimes you will, just to confirm it. So just something to be aware of. A lot of times, if you find something like that, you will call the client first and get confirmation if they want you to test that. So again, just be aware this varies a lot. As such, a professional will never cover their tracks because the assessment was planned to and agreed to beforehand. Although there are multiple tools for covering tracks, I will not talk about any of them in this room. If you're truly curious, you can research them yourself. Some ethical hacking courses will talk about these. Most don't really care because they're not important to us. However, even though you do not cover your tracks, this does not resolve your liability for exploitation. Often you will need to assist the IT administrator or system owner in cleaning up the exploit code that you utilized, and also recommending how to prevent the attack in the future. This is a very important note. Note down wherever you've compromised. You want to note down your cleanup steps because it's going to make it easier for reporting. While ethical hackers rarely have the need to cover their tracks, you still must carefully track and notate all of the tasks you performed as part of the penetration test to assist in fixing the vulnerabilities and recommending changes to the system owner. Cool. We're going to go ahead and mark down that we read this section and then move into our last section here, reporting. The final phase of the penetration test is the reporting phase. This is one of the most important phases where you will outline everything that you found. The reporting phase often includes the following things. So the findings or vulnerabilities, the criticality of each finding, a description or brief overview of how the finding was discovered. You'll sometimes have your kill chain, so that is walking through what you did and in what order you did. Either to compromise the domain or something else. Remediation steps or remediation recommendations to resolve the findings. So how do they fix it? The amount of reporting documentation varies widely from by the type of engagement that the pen tester is involved in. A findings report generally goes in 3 formats. So you have a vulnerability scan results. This depends on the company you work for. Some companies will put vulnerability scan results. Some just won't, or they'll include them in another section of the report. You'll have the findings summary, so list all findings as outlined above, and then you have the full formal report. Again, it varies which one of these you're going to report. This makes more sense when you're actually doing the reporting. Just know that there are different forms of reports. Typically, that is your executive summary, which is what you're going to present, and then you have technical details, and that's the report that the IT administrator actually is going to care about. However, it's going to be a lot longer than your executive summary. As stated before, there are many varying levels of documentation for a final written report. Here's how each type of reporting would look in practice. So a vulnerability report usually looks like this. You can see that this is just output from a scanner. It looks like Acunetics. And you can see just an overview of the vulnerabilities found. And it looks like they have a summary score here. And then there's some information on the actual server that's there that was scanned in this case. A finding summary is usually something like this. So you have the finding, which in this specific case is SQL injection in the IT parameter of the CATS page. You have the criticality, the description of what it actually is, and then how to fix it with the remediation recommendation. A full sample report can be found here. This is from the Cyber Mentor. This is a fantastic report to look at, and I'm actually going to pull it up because I really like this demo. Let me pull this up. It is a DocX. Okay. We're not going to bother with it. Look at this in your own time. It is a fantastic pen test report. If you want a really, really good example to work off of, this is something that I recommend getting familiar with before doing an exam like your OSCP. because you need to write a report for that exam. You should have a general idea of how to write a report before then. The Cyber Mentor has done a lot of other good content, such as example resumes, YouTube videos, and some really good Udemy courses. I do recommend these heavily. And you can see his practical ethical hacking courses linked here. And that's something that, especially if you are new to hacking, and you want to get into the more corporate side of things, what it would look like for doing a pen test on a company environment, practical ethical hacking is a really nice course for that. And that will take you beyond the basics of this methodology outline. However, this is a nice place to get started. What would the type of formatting that involves a full documentation of all findings within a formal report? That should be the full formal report. And then what is the other thing that a pen tester should provide in a report beyond the finding name, the finding description, the finding criticality? That is going to be the remediation recommendation. Yeah, you need to tell them how to fix it. And that is going to do it. Great job by the room creator, Red Robin. You did a fantastic job on this room. As always, if you guys have any questions, I am going to have the TryHackMe Discord as well as the DarkSec Discord linked in the video description below. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to me and then follow me on Twitter. And otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video.